I want to introduce some people to talk real policy. We've got a panel coming up that I want to introduce, which is talking about the very nature of housing. How do you manage housing, particularly in a context of our Boomtown? To chair it, moderate it, to be provocateur, we've asked Charles Moore. You might know him from his earlier work as head of SOPA here in this very old town when he struggled with the roundabout that he left me still to try and manage. Charles is now the boss of BaptistCare, and with a large sway of both social housing, affordable housing and aged care across the region. He's going to bring up Kumar, Kalyanakumar, the former boss of Acacia, now running Acacia Capital Partners, that's been the brains behind announcing last week's Westmead social housing scheme using federal money, private money to deliver housing. The aforementioned Nicola Lemon, the soon-to-retire CEO of Hume Community Housing Association. Alison McDonagh, and I again want to pay tribute to Tahi for the work. This is an agency that's been to hell and back. This is an agency where they've gone through board papers, parliamentary inquiries, a Sydney Morning Herald fascination beyond belief about the technicalities of how you manage rail assets on or off the books. But I know it as an agency that's going to deliver 30% affordable housing targets above their transport stations, and we're very delighted for that. And also James Waddell from NAB, an organisation that's literally put billions of dollars on the table to try and debt fund social and affordable housing. Let's hear from them about how we can actually stop whinging and get on and fix the problem. Charles.
Well, just as the panel comes on up, let me just introduce myself. So, Charles Moore, the CEO of BaptistCare, as you just heard from Chris, and you're probably wondering, why have you got a for-purpose aged care provider hosting this session? BaptistCare does deliver care services to 10,000 ageing Australians across residential, retirement living and care in home. But we also we reinvest our dividend into right now just almost 700 social and affordable homes. We're also a community housing provider. We also provide services to close to 4,000 clients who are in desperate need of help. We employ almost 4,000 staff, many of whom live in Western Sydney. So I think that's why you've got me here today. Just by way of some opening remarks, social housing is not just about finding homes for rough sleepers. And affordable housing needs to be truly affordable. A safe and stable roof over your head is vital to give people an opportunity to rebuild or to build their lives after escaping domestic violence, losing a home through unemployment, mental illness, or many other health issues. Or just simply when your award salary means that you have to choose between paying the rent and putting food on the table. I thought I'd just kick off by sharing with you just one story from one of our tenants. We had a single parent apply for one of our affordable housing units. She'd been in a domestic violence situation for many years. She fled the state with her 6-year-old daughter, seeking safety and a new start. When we met her, she was living in a women's refuge with her daughter, and she'd been able to start work with a local cleaning company. But after more than 100 applications for rental properties, she was still unable to find secure, safe and affordable housing. When she moved into one of our properties, we had a care worker on site to welcome her. Our staff member asked her daughter what she was looking forward to most about her new home. Do you know what her reply was? My own bed and a place to keep our food where no one else will take it. There was no mention of toys, no mention of new clothes, no mention of a new school, no mention of friends, just a bed and food. We provided that little family with assistance to source furniture, toys, food packages, linked her into the local social services. We've worked with her to set goals, to help her to complete study in health. She's just finished her Certificate 3 in care work. She's now working for us in a BaptistCare residential aged care facility. She's feeling safe. She's feeling secure. She's watching her daughter make new friends and settle into a new school. She's now able to make long-term goals. She's really hoping to be able to one day buy her own home. Do you know what? There's more than 50,000 other stories just like this yet to be told. That's the waiting list. There's over 50,000 people waiting for a house. That doesn't include those that every day are experiencing mortgage or rental stress. That's why something needs to change to address the housing shortfall and ensure people who are vulnerable or have been hit hard by challenges that they never saw coming, or are just working hard to deliver essential services that we get the benefit of more often than not, but are going backwards because they're spending more than 30% of their income on rent. Social and affordable housing is in the spotlight in a way that it hasn't ever been before, and that is a good thing. It's fantastic that the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has established a new $10 billion social housing fund to build more than 30,000 affordable homes for vulnerable Australians and frontline workers. It's a great start, but it's only a start. In addition, the investment landscape is absolutely changing right before us. Both the banking and superannuation sectors are seeking ways to become active participants. They are bringing knowledge and capital from the UK, from Europe, and from the US. Social and affordable housing is a pressing national issue and a very, very significant issue right here in Western Sydney. So Brownie loves a microphone. He's done a great job of introducing this fantastic panel who's got some great ideas and insights in terms of how we can work together to tackle this problem. So let's just jump straight into it. About 12 months ago, a Deloitte report was commissioned by the Dialogue. It's good reading. I commend it to you. And Deloitte states in that report, and I'm going to read, the biggest issue faced by the social and affordable housing sector in Australia is the large and growing gap between supply and demand. Western Sydney is expected to experience a shortfall of over 28,000 social and affordable properties by 2036. Given current population projections and even accounting for the large releases of housing supply across the region. Overlay that in New South Wales we've seen homelessness increase by close to 40% during the pandemic. And for those that do have access to housing, rental stress is increasing. Last year, over 50% of low-income households experienced rental stress in the private rental market. Nicola, hello. As the CEO of Hume Community Housing, you're on the front line. Is it polite to describe you as a veteran? You've been there, done that.
No, not quite. And I'm not retiring, I'm resigning.
And you're not retiring.
Not dead
Bad term, Chris. What are you seeing? Is social and affordable housing in crisis? Is that too big a word?
Absolutely not. Thanks, Charles. So over at least 10 years, and there's other people on the panel that will attest to this, housing and real estate markets worldwide have transformed into global capital markets and been driven by financial excess. This is what I describe as the financialisation of assets. This phenomenon occurs when housing is treated as a commodity, a vehicle for wealth and investment. But that needs to be balanced with a consideration of housing as a vehicle for social good. As we've heard, housing is a cornerstone to life and human well-being. Home is much more than 4 walls and a roof. It's somewhere to live in peace, security and dignity. It's the base which allows people to prosper and aspire from. We sought safety in our homes through the pandemic to increase our chances of staying healthy. And so, although housing is increasing as a global commodity, it's also a fundamental human right. So who benefits most from the financialisation of assets? Shareholders, individuals with capacity to invest, commercial entities, governments. The people who don't benefit and get left behind are people on very low and low incomes, and increasingly in cities like Sydney and surrounds, those working on moderate incomes. If it has been the golden era for GWS, as cited by the Premier, that's fantastic. But people have been left behind in that process in Greater Western Sydney. As Charles says, there's 50,000 people on the waiting list and thousands more applying weekly for private rental homes and affordable housing homes. Each month, Hume receives 140 applications for affordable housing, and we have 0 affordable housing properties available at the moment. We often find people in financial stress in the private rental market paying well over 50% of their income towards rent. Those people that apply for those applications and make applications for our affordable housing homes, 50% of those, yes, have Centrelink income as their main income, but 50% are on wages. They can't find a home to live in near work or anywhere near work. The rental vacancy rates are at lower historic lows. In 25 years of career, I've never seen it as bad. In Fairfield, it's 0.8%, and in Parramatta LGA, it's 1.2%. A functional private rental market should be a vacancy rate of 3% and above. It's never been harder to rent a property. Couple that with no significant investment in new supply of social and affordable housing since the housing stimulus package back in the GFC in 2008, and also the requirement for state entities or organisations and departments like Land and Housing Corp to be self-funding and have high-value extraction policy, which then sees the sale off of government land and social housing not replaced by social housing in the same place, and dilapidation and decline in public housing assets, and only policies that tinker around the edges. Home ownership is in significant decline. Put all those things together, is there a crisis? Yes, there's a bloody crisis. There has been for years, and it's got worse. The good news is that community housing providers like Hume and others in the sector have the capability, have the capacity to attract that housing as a commodity investment. But what we can do is balance that with our profit for purpose and charitable endeavours. And you'll hear more from the panel about how that's going to work.
I'm just going to come back to that in just a moment, but I just want to check, are we in consensus, panel, which makes it very boring if we are we in crisis?
Yes, I think we have a crisis, but it is not as bad as some of the other countries facing. If I look at Europe, the US, the problem's much bigger. It's worth just noting that for 2 reasons. One is that if we are not careful, if we don't have urgency to address the issue, we'll be there very fast. And the second thing is those countries are using some interesting models to solve this problem. So there are some lessons for us to learn from and try and implement it and put the Aussie flavour to it.
Good, so we've got consensus. It's a word that is used regularly and probably too often, but we do have a crisis, confirmed. But it can get worse if we don't do something about it right now. That's what I'm hearing, Kumar, from what you see across, across the globe. Right. Good. Nicola, just coming back to you, we've got a number of state agencies that are involved in this space. I'm just wondering, given that you've worked in the UK and here for a long period of time, what's the differentiator? How can CHPs really bring value? What's the differentiator between a CHP and bureaucracy trying to solve this issue?
Look, community housing providers in the UK are a much more established market, a much more mature market, but we have the capacity and capability in Australia to have that market, and it's starting to happen. We're seeing the infancy in that. We also provide a range of wraparound services and community-driven, community-led, customer-led support services. Yeah. I think the brutal reality is that in Western Sydney, the public housing stock is 44 years old and comes with a huge backlog of maintenance, some $350 to $400 million. Frankly, I think if we keep doing the same thing and leaving it in the hands of the bureaucracy, we are going to see continued low-quality housing solutions that are not at scale. There you go, ranting. A Frontier Advisors report, which was commissioned, interestingly, by the Industry Super Australia, said that affordable and social housing investments are more stable and less volatile than traditional commercial property sectors. There you go. There's a view from the superannuation industry. The report added that institutional investment into affordable housing also allows funds to positively influence the economy and society, helping to improve capital formation and increasing productivity. We've got two blokes here in the capital markets. Kumar, what new and innovative funding models are you seeing? You've just recently left AXA right at the wrong moment. Others are taking the glory of a very interesting new development. What are you seeing around funding models and how they can assist community housing providers produce more stock? And that's the critical point, isn't it? Produce more stock.
Yep. If you look at Australia, there are some interesting models that we have evidence, but none of them have actually produced scale. And hopefully in time, with some refinement, we'll have scale. So the ground lease model that we have seen in Victoria, it's a pretty good one where the government offers the land pretty much for nothing and maybe even some financial support to get a developer or CHP going. And the lease is for 25, 50 years. And at the end of the lease term, the property and the buildings go back to the state. Then we have seen in New South Wales SAF-type programs where CHPs are supported so that CHPs could go and secure private properties to convert them to affordable social housing. They're all great, but I think the newest one is the Housing Australia Future Fund, which has allocated $10 billion and to be managed by the Future Fund guys. And all of those returns are going to come to the sector. How that money is going to be used to catalyze additional houses, I don't know. It's kind of still a work in progress, it seems. But I feel, people talk about it's $500 million a year. If that money is used the right way, in right structures, with the right kind of incentivization to the CHPs and the private sector, I actually think we can address this issue. There are a couple of other things as well before I sort of come back to the AXA investment. Charles talked about 28,000 home shortage in western suburbs. The dialogues election priorities say 67,000. But if you look at nationally, currently 600,000 additional modern affordable homes are needed. And that number is going to go to million homes. Okay, and that's in that we have the issue of rundown state-owned houses. That needs to be addressed as well. The issue is much bigger than pump some money in and problem will go away. We need a coordinated effort to address this issue. We have 300 odd CHPs in this country, 30 tier 1 CHPs, roughly about 5,000 homes managed by the largest CHPs. And for the CHPs, the challenge now is with inflation, interest rate going up, investor returns going up, how are they going to fund additional homes? How are they going to access additional inventory? That's a big issue. Then there's the private sector, which is willing to come in and support to solve the problem because, as somebody said, the Frontier report says, home investment in residential or housing is one of the stable asset classes. But to do that, you need the state to support here by creating the framework one and facilitating provision of additional homes. On top of that as well, the states have the obligation, and as well as the federal government, to subsidize provision of discounted tenancies. So that's sort of setting the scene a little bit. But coming back to AXA though, AXA is a global investor in residential. It's 25% of its book is residential today. It understands the need for social housing, affordable housing globally, and what it does more than financial returns. And we have exposure in US and Europe and Japan. We see the stresses here, and also that gives an opportunity for investors like AXA to come in and make a difference. Without giving the IP away, the deal that we did with St. George is that AXA is investing in this asset and hopefully a few more for long term. It's not a structured deal to get in and get out. Second thing is, alongside St. George, AXA is taking on full leasing market asset risks. Is that enough, Charles?
Yeah, so you've craftily not told us what the secret ingredients were, but you've told us that AXA, as a large global player, has significant interest here and is deploying capital with a different lens to the duration of its investment. Which probably leads me to a question for James. Does NAB see this as a risky investment class? Part one. Part two, with your lender's hat on, where do you think the credit rating really sits? And what does that mean for your pricing? While you're contemplating that, I can see a number of questions coming through on Slido. We're going to get to those in just a moment, but go.
So, Charles, just in relation to risk, I think Nicola said it really well. She's got no vacancies. And so while the income that comes from the properties is lower, the standard deviation, which is a measure of risk, is very low. And so you can say that there's a really steady cash flow coming out of these types of assets. So no risk is low. I think if I look to the UK, as Nicola did, in 40 years, not a single dollar has been lost by a lender by lending to community housing. But what CHPs need, in my view, is strong regulation and long-term funding available. Risk, I think, is about perception here. And when I speak to credit executives in banks, what they don't understand is they don't understand the sector. But when we go to a rating agency, they do. They get it. And so we've actually done a rating for one of our clients, Brisbane Housing Company. It's AA minus. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's the same rating that NAB has. It's the same rating that Westpac has. And so you take that information to your credit executive and they fall off their chair because they haven't ever thought about it. And so I think there's an education process here with banks, with people within banks, and we're driving that within NAB. I think regulation is critical because what we need, what we see in the UK is a toothy regulator that can drive mergers. When there's a failing CHP, they merge weak with strong. It's the same thing that happens with APRA here in Australia. When a bank is failing, it's merged with a strong bank. So that there's no loss. And that's really important. I think the other thing here is that you see it with what AXA's doing here. It's about partnerships of capital and bringing all the superpowers of the various players to the table. So government with their ability to provide land or grant funding, superannuation industry with long-term perspectives, the debt capital markets with long-term perspectives, the banks with the capacity to provide construction funding. So they're the sort of the places that I see, and if you can bring all those groups together as AXA have with this transaction, then that's where you get really great results.
Yeah, that's quite insightful. Thanks for that, James. Just going to divert off to a couple of questions now because I think they're actually related. Basically, there's one here that's saying costs are going up in terms of construction, labour's tight, makes projects pretty marginal, yields are very low. How are projects really viable? There's another one here that's referring to do we need to see tax reform? Same sort of question. How do we make projects viable? So I'm just interested. What's the insights from the whole panel? Don't fight. One at a time. Do we need to see incentivisation across the sector to make these projects more viable so that they can be produced on scale?
Me to go first? Yes, support from the Fed and state government is a must. It can come in many forms. As I mentioned, the HAF fund is a good start. But let's just take a few of those sort of specific opportunities one by one. Currently, if a foreign investor comes in and buys an office building, it pays 15% tax. If a foreign investor at the same time invests in a BTR project or social affordable housing project, they're going to pay 30% tax. It's ridiculous. Okay? And this has been on the table of the treasurers and the previous prime ministers for nearly 10 years. They're still sort of looking at it, and hopefully this government will try and address that. At the state level as well, if you're a foreign investor, you're paying foreign investor surcharge for buying land. Then there's the GST on the construction of home for renting. That is not levied on build to sell, or at least they can sort of recover it. So from a taxation sense, they're kind of very easy changes that states and federal government can make to make this investment interesting. You want me to stop and let somebody else talk?
I would also say planning incentives, height and FSR, that there is, the housing sector does have it, and we were talking, and you've done some of them, but from a developer's perspective, it actually isn't enough incentive for what's in there, so you really have to look at how you can incentivise developers to provide some more supply.
Great, thank you. This Slido thing is starting to go nuts, and there's quite a few questions coming through. I'm going to say, when I'm scanning them, it says speed up the planning process. Another one, speeding up planning. It's a topic, and I'm going to bring you into this conversation very shortly, Alison. But I just want to come back to James on one other question. I want to talk about the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation, probably better known to most people in this room as NIFIC. Let's just call it as it is. Isn't NAB just as capable of aggregating bonds and issuing debt as that mob? Why does NIFIC have this magic glow? When can you be a NIFIC?
No, I don't have a government guarantee.
Other than that,
Look, I think yes, NAB could do that, and I mean we made submissions to the government when NIFIC was being created. It has a guarantee. I don't believe that's the most effective form. What I believed should have been done is that there should have been an interest subsidy. And this addresses many of the problems and many of the questions that are coming up is, it's more expensive to borrow money. Well, if there was an interest subsidy, then there'd be no question. The capacity of that entity to deliver funding to community housing providers would be unquestioned. And as interest rates rise, it becomes more challenging. But the guarantee sort of helps that, but not really. And I can't intervene in that process because, we're subject to the same market conditions. But I think, one of the things about NIFIC is that it does crowd out the banks because it is so much cheaper. But that's not a bad thing necessarily. As I said earlier, I mean, banks are pretty good at doing construction funding. We're good at lending 3 to 5 years, but pretty rubbish after that. You think you've got a 30-year mortgage? Well, not really. It's, we securitise them. We do all sorts of things with them because we don't really have access to long-term funding ourselves. In the UK, our clients get 30-year funding for community housing providers. We go to the capital markets and we raise that, and we do it without the government guarantee, and it's cost effective. There needs to be changes to regulation. Perhaps tweaks is probably the answer. And there actually is a big change to regulation coming through. At the moment, we have to treat loans to community housing providers as commercial real estate loans, which are slotted. I won't explain what slotting is, but it's very expensive for banks to lend to slotted assets. But from the 1st of January next year, we're not going to have to do that. What we're going to have to do is assess the credit risk of the borrower. And then that will reduce, if we think the borrower is a low credit risk, it will reduce the cost. It will reduce the amount of capital we have to allocate. So that's a good thing, and that'll make us more competitive, but we're still not going to get close to NIFIC because they don't charge anything for their capital because they don't have any.
Yep. So in summary, to play that back to you, NIFIC absolutely has a role. It's a good thing. We should continue to encourage the Treasurer to support and pump more that way. But
Charles, I was just doing some maths before we started. I mean, the requirement in this document is for $33.5 billion or more of delivering housing. That would be $17 billion of funding through NIFIC. They can't do it by themselves. They need everybody else to come together. They need the super industry. They need the banks. They need international capital markets.
That was my concluding remark. Well done. Yep. So NIFIC can't do it on itself. We need to see some tweaks to the way the banking sector works to allow longer duration debt so that it can stand alongside and support in a different way to what it currently does. Yep. Excellent. Planning. Dealing, because it's still going, this thing's still scrolling. We know that the one consistent theme about planning is its complete inconsistency. Drives a number of us in this room insane. So supply is absolutely going to remain a problem until there is clear, stable public policy, and that policy is affected in a timely manner. This is where I'm going to bring in Alison. Tahi is actively thinking about this in a very real way, and you've also worked in the private sector, so you've got a foot in both camps here. I just want to start about talking about inclusionary rezoning. What are your? I'm going to ask you what your thoughts are rather than what Tahi's thoughts are. What are your thoughts on inclusionary rezoning? And I am going to ask you though, how's Tahi thinking about this along the corridors that it controls?
So inclusionary rezoning I think is absolutely worth thinking about. It's complex. If you have a site that you allow affordable housing and the council has nothing to do with it. How do you determine the height of the FSR, all of that? So there's actually at the moment the housing step allows you to, if you're within 800 metres of a train line, to be able to get a complying certificate, and then basically you can use the same height, the same FSR that is around the local area, and you sort of negotiate that with council. But that still takes time. And I think that there is a way that you can have inclusionary zoning and still satisfy the needs of the local council. So I think it's definitely worth looking into. I think at the moment, my take on it, having moved into government, is that there's actually an alignment with government at the moment to really look at how to provide social and affordable housing. And when Tahi came out with our pilot project, which is 5 sites that we have lots of land next to the train lines, and they're all zoned SP2, so you can't do housing on them at the moment. We picked 5 of them and said, okay, these are ones that we think we could do affordable housing on. They're close to train lines. We'll package that up and we'll provide it to a community housing provider. That's been, and what we planned was that we would lease the land for 50 years and give it to them for a small return. We've gone out to EOI, we've spoken to a lot of community housing providers. The feedback has been it's hard to get funding if it's leased. So we're now looking at, okay, how can we tweak our model to make sure we get the NIFIC as well, the NIFIC funding, and they can get funding along, because the CHPs want to be able to use the land to then leverage for the next deal and the next deal. So, you know, providing a lease doesn't help them to be able to do that. But we also went to the Department of Planning and said, well, could we put these sites into, make them state significant development so that we could get them approved faster? And they were very open to that, and they've actually just put that in as well. So I think there is a movement to sort of look at how can we do that and how can planning be fast-tracked for social and affordable housing.
So I just want to pick on that for a moment. So you've put projects into state significant development, right? So councils.
So you still have to go through the complying certificate process in terms of what your height and FSR is, but then you use the Department of Planning to get the approval for the DA. So that can be a faster process through the Department of Planning rather than going through council. Yeah, because surely local councils and private landowners would just absolutely welcome a blanket inclusionary rezoning, wouldn't they? They'd open arms. No.
Yeah, right. I've got 4 minutes. I want to touch on one more point. I want to tell you that BaptistCare is currently working on a white paper. We've titled it the Forgotten Suburbs. You know what it does? We're doing some research looking into the complete lack of social infrastructure in the suburbs of Mount Druitt, Bidwell, Wilmont, Lethbridge Park, the list goes on. These suburbs, I think, embarrassingly and disgracefully are experiencing massive social distress. Residents are struggling to access education, training and employment opportunities, and a key primary driver is the lack of local public transport. You've heard that mentioned a couple of times already today. The last mile, the local fabric, the public place. Just give you a little example. Do you know if you live in Wilmont and you want to get a job as a baggage handler or a cleaner at the new Western Sydney Airport, you've just dropped your child at school. Guess what you're going to have to do? You're going to have to put your thumb out and hitch a lift across a suburb to find a local bus. Then you're going to have to catch 2 buses that are going to drop you on the side of a road, and then you've got to put your thumb out again and hitch another lift to the airport. At best, assuming as soon as you put your thumb out, somebody picks you up, it's going to be an hour and a quarter, an hour and a half, as opposed to if you could afford a car, and if you have a car, you can afford to put fuel in it, because that's the choices these people make in these suburbs. 15 to 20 minute road trip. Alison, transport, jobs, affordable housing. I think they all go together, don't they?
They do, I agree. And obviously Tahi does not look after the transport, where the transport goes.
No.
But yes, I mean, what Chris was saying before about making sure we've got the buses, doing a north-south link, all of those things have to be looked at. And they have been looked at for many years, but they haven't actually been, slowly they're getting there, but that needs to really, that's the missing link really in Sydney now. The Western Sydney north-south has not been properly addressed.
Yep.
But I agree with you, we need to be providing affordable housing close to jobs, close to transport, and that then enables people to be able to get jobs and to move around the city.
Yep. We've got 50 seconds. Nicola, you've worked in the UK where mixed-use integrated communities seem to thrive. What's the learning for you?
In 26 seconds, CHP's ownership of land, ability to leverage, mixed tenure developments where we can have a strategic asset management plan that allows us to recycle assets and have another additional income as well as the rental income. I think that we have been short-sighted in the policy settings and contractual arrangements that we've got in New South Wales, and if that changes, we can boom.
000. Please thank the panel.